The Russian Revolution. What was it and why did it happen? That is the subject of this lesson. The Russian Revolution was actually a series of revolutions taking place in Russia throughout 1917. They ultimately resulted in the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and the establishment of a communist state. We need to understand that the Russian Revolution did not come about overnight. It was preceded by years and years of social unrest. Let's go back to the year 1905 and learn about some events that set the stage for the Russian Revolution of 1917. In 1905, Tsar Nicholas II was the Emperor of Russia. He came to power in 1894, and he was not particularly popular with the Russian people. He did not have the charisma characteristic of other leaders. Many people felt he was haughty and aloof. Many peasants and middle-class citizens felt the Tsar was out of touch with the realities of their meager existence. For these reasons, his political power was less than secure. Adding to the Tsar's unpopularity was the fact that Imperial Russia was losing the Russo-Japanese War. This, compounded with agricultural stagnation, class warfare, and general unrest, caused many Russians to become dissatisfied with their monarchist government. In early 1905, protests broke out in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, and elsewhere. Peasants and industrial workers went on strike and put on demonstrations throughout the city, including at the Tsar's Winter Palace. On January 22, 1905, a day that became known as Bloody Sunday, the Tsar's Imperial Guards opened fire on a crowd of thousands of peaceful protesters. No one knows for certain how many people were killed, but figures range from 100 into the thousands. The heavy-handed action of the Tsar's Imperial Guards sparked further rioting and added fuel to the fire of revolution. Concerned his rule might be toppled, Nicholas II sought to appease revolutionaries by granting reforms. Caving to political pressure, he approved the creation of the Duma, a legislative assembly. The first Duma convened in 1906. The Tsar also agreed to a constitution granting basic civil liberties and transforming his absolute monarchy into more of a limited constitutional monarchy. We need to remember, the Tsar absolutely did not want to institute these changes, but given the tide of resentment toward him, he basically had no choice. His hands were tied. At first it looked like Nicholas II had weathered the storm of revolution. Demonstrations winded down as his reforms were supported by the people. Then came World War I in 1914. With war came unimaginable loss of life, food shortages, and countless other forms of human misery. As the war dragged on, the people increasingly became dissatisfied with it, feeling it simply wasn't worth the cost. Again, the Tsar's leadership came into question. In March of 1917, which was actually February according to the old-style Julian calendar system, large-scale demonstrations swept the capital city of Petrograd. Peasants, workers, and even soldiers came out in armed protest. The capital soon devolved into anarchy, forcing Nicholas II to abdicate the throne. The February Revolution, as it is called, was important because it resulted in the overthrow of the Tsar and the installation of a new leftist provisional government. Russia's new provisional government was highly divided between moderates and radicals. Members of the radical faction were called Bolsheviks. They were composed primarily of working-class citizens and were followers of Vladimir Lenin's communist ideology. In early November of 1917, which, again, was October according to the Julian calendar system, the radical Bolsheviks seized power in what has come to be called the October Revolution. It has also been called the Bolshevik Revolution. Arming themselves, the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government and declared a communist state. This state became the foundation for the Soviet Union. After a successful revolution, Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin moved quickly to end Russia's participation in World War I. For the Bolsheviks and many in Russia, the war was simply not worth fighting. By the end of 1917, much of the Russian army had laid down their arms, although some groups continued to fight. After months of negotiations, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk officially ended Russia's involvement in World War I. The treaty between the new Bolshevik government and the Central Powers was signed March 3, 1918. The Russian Revolution has had a profound impact on 20th century world history. It ended Russia's involvement in World War I and, at the same time, led to the Russian Civil War, in which Bolshevik Red forces fought conservative White forces. Between 1917 and 1922, the Russian Revolution also led to the creation of the world's first communist state, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, commonly called the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union became one of the world's leading 20th century powers until its fall in 1991. Let's review. The Russian Revolution was actually a series of revolutions in 1917 that ultimately resulted in the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and the establishment of a communist government. During the Revolution of 1905, on Bloody Sunday, the Tsar's guards fired upon peaceful protesters, killing hundreds. Concerned his authority might topple, the Tsar conceded to reforms, including the establishment of the Duma, a legislative assembly. Things calmed down until early 1917, when the February Revolution resulted in the Tsar abdicating the throne and the installation of a leftist provisional government. Then, in October, the Bolsheviks, followers of Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the provisional government and established a communist state in what has been called the October Revolution. Shortly afterwards, Vladimir Lenin moved to end Russian involvement in World War I. On March 3, 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed, formally ending Russia's participation in the war.